Here asks something rarely discussed about the end of a marriage. Your former spouse is stepping into an emotional labyrinth they've spent years convincing themselves, whoa, it'd be challenging. This isn't about some vindictive scenario where they suddenly comprehend their loss and return apologetically. Rather, this explores what unfolds when someone exchanges the familiar for the unknown and observes that unknown gradually reveal its true nature. Allow me to describe what's happening right now as you read this. Countless individuals sit in their solitary living spaces, browsing through their former partner's social media, observing posts about fresh starts and optimal living. These people torture themselves, believing their ex is flourishing while they struggle. However, behind those curated images and inspirational messages, something entirely different is unfolding. They reapproaching a truth so unforgiving that their mind will fundamentally restructure itself just to handle the mental conflict. When someone exits a long-term marriage, they're not simply leaving their partner. They're abandoning an entire mental framework they haven't consciously acknowledged. Consider this carefully. Throughout your time together, you served as their baseline for virtually everything. Each choice, every feeling, all future planning, incorporated you somewhere in the calculation. Even during moments of criticism shared with confidants, you remained central to their mental world. And presently, they're suspended in emptiness without anchor, attempting to convince themselves that this drift represents liberation. Let's examine specifically what transpires because the sequence is remarkably consistent. The initial stage is self-celebration. This extends from 2 weeks to 3 months. They're intoxicated by their own choice. Each morning brings mental congratulations for displaying such courage, such strength, such autonomy. They redecorate their space, begin that exercise routine they constantly mentioned. Perhaps install a dating application just to explore possibilities. Their social circle provides validation like a drug. You appear wonderful, you're radiant, you merit far superior, and they accept it completely. During this stage, they're not inhabiting actual reality. They're inhabiting a narrative they're constructing about reality. The narrative where they're the protagonist who escaped ordinariness, where limitless opportunities await discovery. Their phone buzzes with connections and communications. People are providing attention they haven't experienced in years. They interpret this as confirmation they made the correct decision. What remains unrealized is their confusing volume for value, attention for genuine interest, and freshness for worth. Then arrives stage 2, and this is where circumstances become intriguing. The realization, though it resembles a gradual collision, it begins with minor details. They attend their first genuine date following the separation. The person appears ideal, theoretically. Attractive, accomplished, articulates appropriate things. They share a meal, perhaps beverages. Everything appears positive. Then at evening's conclusion, they make their advance. And abruptly, they recognize something that strikes them like frozen water. This person doesn't genuinely care about them. Not authentically. They do not know about their fear of storms, or their compulsion to verify the door lock repeatedly, or their tears during that particular commercial with animals. To this person, they're merely another evening, and that's when the first fracture appears in their story. But they persist, because acknowledging uncertainty now would require admitting potential error, and that's mentally unbearable, so they intensify. More meetings, more applications, more evenings with companions. Except now something has shifted. Attention doesn't feel equally intoxicating. The praise feels empty. They begin observing details. How these individuals discuss their former spouses, how they treat service workers, how rapidly they attempt physical escalation. And gradually, without conscious awareness, they begin comparing them to you. Not deliberately, understand. Deliberately, they're still maintaining the narrative that you represented the issue. But unconsciously, their mind is performing its function. It's identifying patterns. It's evaluating and contrasting. That seemingly charming individual constantly interrupts her. The one with the impressive career is emotionally distant. The entertaining, impulsive one is actually just unreliable and drinks excessively. And with each comparison, you begin appearing superior retrospectively. Not because you were flawless, but because you were familiar, you were secure, you were home. This is when stage 3 initiates. the anxiety. It typically occurs around the 6 to 8 month period. The novelty has entirely dissipated. Their friends are exhausted from hearing about their dating experiences. Their children, if they exist, are displaying behavioral issues because their world has been disrupted. And they've been excessively occupied with self-discovery to notice. They're drained from maintaining the performance of contentment because that's its current state, a performance. Every social media post about optimal living requires increased effort. Every public smile feels heavier. They're a performer who's forgotten their motivation. The anxiety manifests diversely. Some individuals enter overdrive, becoming almost frantic in their pursuit of validation. More meetings, more activities, more anything to avoid stillness with their thoughts. Others withdraw, spending entire weekends immobile, browsing old photographs, attempting to determine where everything deteriorated. But they all share one commonality. They begin revising history. The marriage that seemed so unbearable, perhaps it wasn't that terrible. You, the person they couldn't tolerate being near? Perhaps they were excessively critical. The future they were so confident about. Perhaps they miscalculated. And here's where it becomes genuinely psychological. They can't simply admit making an error that would devastate their entire self-concept. They invested months, potentially years, constructing an identity around being the individual courageous enough to depart. Their entire social narrative is built on this foundation. So instead, they do something remarkable. They create an alternative story, one where perhaps you've transformed, perhaps you've matured. Perhaps if circumstances were different currently, it could function. This allows them to consider reconciliation without admitting wrongness. Meanwhile, let's discuss what's transpiring in the dating environment they're navigating, because this is where reality genuinely strikes. The available options for a divorced individual, particularly one with children, aren't what romantic films would suggest. The interested individuals fall into several predictable categories. There are the manipulators who perceive them as vulnerable targets, someone susceptible and eager to feel wanted. There are the committed individuals seeking affairs who conveniently omit mentioning their partners till several dates later. There are the perpetually single individuals who remain single for legitimate reasons they're about to discover. And yes, there are some genuinely quality people, but they're either unavailable or have numerous choices. And they're competing with individuals who don't carry divorce and parental baggage. They begin realizing something frightening. The perceived value they believed they possessed doesn't exist. All those application matches are illusions. They match with everyone. Those compliments about their attractiveness, they're duplicating and distributing them to countless people. That chemistry they experience it with anyone willing to be intimate. The harsh economics of post-divorce dating strike them forcefully. They're not special. They're not distinctive. They're just another profile among thousands. Stage 4 is the confrontation. This typically occurs around the 1-year mark, though it can require longer for individuals who are particularly obstinate or particularly skilled at self-deception. The confrontation is when the psychological defense mechanisms finally collapse. They can't maintain the narrative anymore. The isolation is overwhelming. Not the type of isolation where you desire company, but the existential type, where you realize you've demolished your entire existence for an illusion that doesn't exist. They'll be sitting in their residence one evening, perhaps after another disappointing date or another weekend where the children are with you, and it will strike them simultaneously. It's the magnitude of their action, the irreversibility of it, the fact that they exchanged a flawed but genuine relationship for a perfect but imaginary one, and the weight of this realization is so substantial that some individuals literally cannot process it. Their minds shut down the emotional centers just to survive it. This is when the late-night messages begin. You recognize them? They typically arrive between 11 at night and 2 in the morning. They start casually. Hey, how are you? Or I was just remembering that time we... But what they're genuinely communicating is, I'm drowning and you're the only safety device I remember. Sometimes they re-hostile. Messages blaming you for events that occurred years ago because hostility is easier than remorse. Sometimes they're melancholy messages reminiscing about positive times, testing to see if there's still a connection. But they all signify the same thing. The alternative wasn't superior. It was synthetic. But here's what's genuinely occurring in their mind during all of this. They're experiencing cognitive dissonance at a level that's actually modifying their neural pathways. Every day, their mind has to reconcile to incompatible truths. I made the correct decision departing. I am miserable and everything is deteriorated now. The psychological strain of maintaining these contradictory beliefs is literally draining. It affects their sleep, their appetite, their ability to focus. Some individuals develop anxiety conditions. Others descend into depression. Many develop a type of emotional numbness where they can't experience anything profoundly anymore because experiencing would mean confronting the truth. Let me describe the Sunday night phenomenon. Is this occurrence where divorced individuals have their worst moments on Sunday nights? Know why? Because Sunday night is when the performance concludes. The weekend is finished. The distractions are eliminated. Children are sleeping or at your location. Tomorrow's Monday, and another week of pretending everything is acceptable. And in that quiet moment, typically between preparing for bed and actually falling asleep, the truth infiltrates. They're alone, genuinely alone. Not independent, not liberated, not empowered, just alone. And the universe has a cruel sense of humor about this because right around the time they're reaching peak remorse, you're probably beginning to heal. You've gone through your own stages, the shock, the anger, the sadness. But individuals typically process divorce differently. We internalize. We reconstruct. Focus on action rather than emotion. So by the time they're realizing what they've lost, you've already started becoming someone different, someone improved, someone who learned from the marriage and the divorce. Someone who, ironically, might have been the person they wanted you to be all along. This creates a psychological torture chamber for them, because now they can observe the version of you they always said they desired, but it's too late. You achieved it without them, because of losing them, and the knowledge that they catalyzed your improvement. But woe, and benefit from it, that is a special type of torment that keeps them awake at night. Let's discuss what transpires with their social circle during all this. Cause friendships, particularly around divorce, are fascinating from a psychological perspective. Initially, their friends are their supporters, so they rallied around them, told them they deserved superior, helped them create the narrative that departing was courageous and correct. But as months pass, dynamics shift. Their married friends start to distance themselves, not consciously but instinctively. They're now a threat, a reminder that marriages conclude. A single individual who might attract their spouse's attention. The invitations to couple gatherings stop arriving. The group communications move forward without them. Their single friends, the ones they thought would be their new community. Their competition now. They're all fishing in the same limited pond, and friendship becomes secondary to survival. Plus, they're not genuinely single like them. They have baggage, history, children perhaps. They're in a different category, and everyone knows it, even if no one articulates it. So, their social world, which was supposed to expand after divorce, actually contracts. They find themselves with fewer genuine friends than ever before. The isolation compounds. The support system they counted on reveals itself to be conditional and temporary. And they realize something frightening. You weren't just their spouse. You were their best friend, their emergency contact, their default companion, their safe space. And they discarded it all for what? For the concept that something superior was waiting. Here's a psychological truth that nobody discusses. Individuals who leave long-term marriages often develop phantom relationship syndrome. Just like amputees experience phantom limbs, divorced individuals experience phantom relationships. They'll catch themselves turning to tell you something amusing that happened. Then remember you're not there. They'll hear your voice in their head commenting on things throughout the day. They'll wake up and for a split second forget you're gone, then have to relive the loss all over again. This isn't necessarily love, it's neurological. Their brain spent years wiring itself around your presence, and those neural pathways don't just disappear. The universe seems to conspire to remind them of what they've lost. Your song plays on the radio, they find one of your old shirts in the laundry, the kids say something exactly the way you would. They go to that restaurant you loved and realize food doesn't taste the same without someone to share it with. These aren't just memories. They're psychological anchors that drag them back to the reality they're trying to escape. And then there's the mathematical problem of finding someone new. Let's be honest about the numbers. If they're 35 or older, divorced, possibly with kids, seeking a serious relationship with a quality person who's also single, emotionally available, financially stable, attracted to them, and willing to take on another person's family, the statistical probability is brutal. Add in their own standards and preferences, which haven't adjusted to their new market reality, and you're looking at odds that would make a lottery ticket seem like a good investment. But they can't admit this, not to others, and especially not to themselves. So, they create coping mechanisms. They lower their standards while telling themselves they're being more open-minded. They accept treatment they never would have before while calling it going with the flow. They tolerate disrespect and frame it as not sweating the small stuff. Each compromise chips away at their self-esteem. But the alternative, admitting they made a catastrophic mistake, is psychologically unbearable. Some individuals enter the renovation phase. They suddenly become obsessed with self-improvement, but not the healthy kind, the desperate kind. New hair, new body, new style, new personality even. They're trying to become someone else. Someone who might be more successful in this new reality. But it's like rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. The problem isn't how they look or act. The problem is that they fundamentally miscalculated what was available versus what they had. The genuinely tragic ones are those who enter rebound relationships quickly and try to force them to be serious. They meet someone, anyone, who shows interest, and immediately try to recreate what they had with you. They introduce them to the kids too quickly. They push for commitment before trust is established. They ignore warning signs, because being with someone problematic feels better than being alone. These relationships always implode, usually spectacularly, leaving them even more damaged than before. And through all of this, you're the ghost that haunts everything. Not because you're doing anything, but because you're the standard, whether they admit it or not. Every person gets compared to you. Not the you they divorced, but the idealized version of you that their regret has created. The you that exists in their memory is better than you ever were in reality, and no one can compete with a ghost that they've perfected in hindsight. Here's what happens next. This is where the psychology gets genuinely dark. Around the 2-year mark, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, they face a choice. They can either admit the truth and try to make amends, possibly attempting reconciliation, or they can double down on the falsehood and reshape their entire personality around it. Most choose the second option. It's easier. They become bitter, cynical. They join online groups that reinforce their choices. They become the individuals who tell other unhappy partners to leave, not because it's right, but because misery loves company, and they need others to validate their choice. The ones who choose honesty face a different challenge. How do you approach someone you've hurt that deeply? How do you admit you were wrong when you've built an entire identity around being right? How do you ask for forgiveness when you're not even sure you deserve it? The psychological weight of this is crushing. Many individuals report that the hardest thing they've ever done wasn't leaving. It was admitting they shouldn't have. But wait, there's another layer to this psychological unraveling that most people never discuss. It's what happens to their sense of identity at the fundamental level. See, when you're married for years, your identity isn't just you anymore. It's you as part of we. Every decision they made, from what to prepare for dinner to where to vacation, was filtered through the lens of being a spouse. Their neural pathways are literally formed around this identity. And when they leave, they're not just losing you, they're losing who they were with you. And that creates an identity crisis that psychology textbooks don't adequately address. Think about the small things they never had to consider before. Which side of the bed to sleep on when the whole bed is empty? What to watch on streaming services when there's no one to compromise with? Where to eat when every restaurant reminds them they're eating alone? These seem trivial, but they're death by 1,000 cuts to their psyche. Every tiny decision becomes a reminder that they're navigating life without a co-pilot, and they fired him. The financial reality is another psychological hammer that drops around month 9. Divorce is expensive. Being single is expensive. That dual income that made life comfortable. Gone. Now they're trying to maintain the same lifestyle on half the resources. But it's not just about money. It's about what money represents. Security, stability, the ability to dream about the future without checking the bank balance first. They traded financial partnership for financial independence. But independence without resources isn't freedom. It's just decorated poverty. And here's something nobody prepares them for: the physical touch deficit. I'm not talking about intimacy. I'm talking about the thousand small touches that happen in a marriage. The hand on the lower back while passing in the kitchen, the feet touching under the covers, the automatic hug when someone's had a bad day. Touch is a human need, as real as hunger or thirst, and suddenly they might go days, weeks without meaningful human contact. Their body starts to rebel. Stress hormones spike. Sleep becomes elusive. Their immune system weakens. They're literally becoming sick from touch starvation. But they can't admit it because that would mean admitting they need what they rejected. The dating applications become a special form of psychological warfare. They re-reduce to a set of photos and a bio competing with individuals 10 years younger who do and have physical imperfections or emotional baggage or schedules dictated by parental responsibilities. The algorithms are brutal. They show their profile to everyone at first, that dopamine hit of matches and messages. Then, as the application learns they're selective or maybe too mature or maybe too complicated, their profile gets buried. The matches slow to a trickle. Messages become lower quality. They realize they've become invisible in a marketplace that only values youth and availability, neither of which they have anymore. Some individuals develop performance exhaustion. They've been performing happiness for so long that they forget what genuine emotion feels like. Their smiles become automatic, not authentic. Their laughter sounds hollow, even to them. They post about living their best life while crying in their vehicles after dropping the kids at school. The gap between their public persona and private reality becomes so wide that they feel like they are reliving a double life, and maintaining that double life is exhausting. It's like being an undercover agent in your own existence. This creates the final psychological torture: regret without redemption, awareness without action. They know what they lost. They know it was their choice. They know it's irreversible. They have to live with this knowledge every single day. Every happy couple they see is a reminder. Every romantic movie is salt in the wound. Every wedding anniversary that passes without celebration is a monument to their miscalculation. And then there's the moment. It always comes when they see you happy. Maybe it's a photo on social media. It's running into you at the store. Maybe the kids mention how much fun they had with you and your new partner. And in that moment, something breaks inside them that can never be fully repaired. Because your happiness is proof that the problem wasn't the marriage. It was their perception of the marriage. You're capable of happiness. You're capable of love. You're capable of being the person another individual wants, which means you were always capable. They just couldn't see it. Or worse, they saw it, but wanted more. This is the final psychological blow. It's the realization that they didn't leave a bad relationship. They left a relationship they made bad in their own mind. Now they have to live with that knowledge forever. Watching from the sidelines, as you build the life they convinced themselves was impossible, just with someone else who appreciated what they couldn't. The cruelest irony. Many of these individuals eventually realized that the problems in the marriage weren't entirely about you, or even mostly about you. They were about their dissatisfaction with themselves that they projected onto the relationship. The restlessness, the feeling that something was missing, the sense that life should be more exciting, those were internal issues that leaving you didn't solve. In fact, leaving you just made them worse, because now they have to face them alone, without the stability and support you provided. What actually happens to your former spouse after divorce? You receive exactly what they requested: freedom, independence, the chance to start over, and they discover that what they requested and what they wanted were two completely different things. They wanted to feel alive again, but they feel dead inside. They wanted excitement, but they received chaos. They wanted to be desired, but they became disposable. They wanted better, but they received different. And different isn't always better. Sometimes different is just different. And sometimes, more often than anyone wants to admit, different is worse. The ultimate psychological revelation that strikes these individuals, usually years later, is this: they didn't leave you because you weren't enough. They left because they thought they deserved more. But deserving and receiving are two different things. The market doesn't care what you think you deserve. Reality doesn't adjust to your expectations. And by the time they figure this out, the chance to fix it has usually passed. That's the truth about what happens to your former spouse after divorce. It's not the social media version, not the story they tell their friends, not even the story they tell themselves, but the real, Raw psychological unraveling that happens when someone trades a flawed reality for a perfect fantasy and discovers that the fantasy was the biggest lie they ever told themselves.